New Orleans in the summer of 1856 was not a city, but a fever dream. The air was a thick, wet wool blanket that clung to the lungs, smelling of the Mississippi silt and the overripe rot of the basin. As Eliza stepped out of the carriage, the mud of Royal Street suctioned at her boots, as if the earth itself were trying to pull her down into the mire. Before her stood the house, a towering monument of white stone and wrought iron that seemed to repel the very sunlight. It was too white, too clean, a bleached skull sitting in the middle of a swamp. "You're the new one?" A voice rasped out it was the coachman, a man whose skin looked like cured leather. He didn't look at her. He only looked at the house with a frantic, darting need to be elsewhere. He dropped her trunk in the mud and whipped the horses into a lather before she could even offer a copper. Eliza stood alone. She was 19, an orphan of the yellow fever outbreaks, possessed of nothing but a sturdy constitution and a desperate need for a wage. She smoothed her apron, took a breath of the jasmine-choked air, and knocked the house of silk and shadows. The interior of the Delphine estate was a masterclass in deception. To enter was to leave the sweltering, muddy reality of Louisiana and step into a cool, crystalline pocket of Paris-dot heavy velvet curtains, dyed a red so deep it bordered on black, choked the windows, ensuring that the outside world remained a distant, blurry memory. The floors were polished to a mirror sheen, reflecting the flickering light of a dozen crystal chandeliers. But beneath the overwhelming scent of expensive jasmine incense and French perfume, there was a persistent, underlying note, the metallic tang of the swamp, and something else. Something sweet and sickly, like meat left too long in the sun. Precision. Eliza. Precision is the only thing that separates us from the beasts in the mud. Madame Delphine appeared not from a room, but seemingly out of the shadows of the grand staircase. She was a woman of terrifying beauty. Her skin was the color of cream, stretched tight over high, aristocratic cheekbones, and her eyes were a piercing, glassy blue the color of a shallow winter sky. She moved without the sound of footsteps, her silk gown hissing against the marble like a viper in the grass. "Madame," Eliza whispered, curtsying so low her knees hit the cold stone. Delphine reached out, her fingers cold as river ice, and lifted Eliza's chin. She didn't look at Eliza's face. She looked at her pores, her teeth, the straightness of her spine. It was the way a collector examines a butterfly before pinning it to a board. "You are symmetrical," Delphine murmured, her voice a melodic, haunting contralto. "I loathe asymmetry. It is a sign of a corrupted soul. My house is a temple of order. Every spoon must face the north. Every candle must burn at the same rate. My servants are not merely help, Eliza. They are the moving parts of my clock. If a gear slips, if a spring breaks, I discard it." She smiled, but the expression didn't reach her eyes. It was a practiced movement of the lips, a gilded mask. "You shall replace Mary," Delphine said, turning her back. She was inconsistent, a cracked vessel. "I sent her away to the country for her clumsiness. I trust you will be more durable." The first fracture for the first 3 days, Eliza worked until her vision blurred. The estate was a labyrinth of tasks. She scrubbed the baseboards with lemon oil until her fingernails bled. She polished the silver until she could see her own exhausted reflection in every fork. Delphine was everywhere and nowhere. She would appear behind Eliza in the kitchens, silently pointing a gloved finger at a microscopic speck of dust. She spoke of purity as if it were a religion, obsessing over the whiteness of the linens and the clarity of the crystal. But the house began to whisper to Eliza. On the 4th morning, while waxing the floor of the upper landing near the forbidden's 3rd-floor staircase, Eliza's cloth caught on a splintered floorboard. As she tugged it free, something snagged. She reached into the narrow gap between the wood and the wall and pulled out a scrap of fabric dot It was a silk ribbon, sky blue and stained with a dark, crusty brown. Eliza's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She recognized it. On her first day, the cook had mentioned Mary's one vanity, a blue ribbon she wore in her hair. A gift from her mother. Madame said she sent her to the country. Eliza whispered to the empty hallway. If Mary had been sent away, why was her most prized possession stuffed into the floorboards like trash? And why was the ribbon stiffened with what looked unmistakably like dried blood? She looked up. The stairs leading to the third floor were shrouded in a heavy velvet portiere. There were no lights up there. No air seemed to move from behind the curtain. It was a dead space, a vacuum in the heart of the house. The symphony of the attic. That night, the heat was unbearable. The jasmine incense downstairs had faded, and the true smell of the house began to rise, a thick, cloying stench that made Eliza's stomach turn. It was the smell of a butcher's shop at closing time. Eliza lay in her small cot in the servants' quarters on the first floor, staring at the ceiling. The house was silent, save for the distant, rhythmic croaking of bullfrogs in the bayou. Then she heard it. Scritch. Thumped. It came from directly above. Far above. It wasn't the sound of footsteps. Footsteps had a gait, a purpose. This was a wet, dragging sound, followed by a dull, heavy vibration that shook the chandelier in the hallway outside her door. Scritch, scritch. Thump. It sounded like something heavy being pulled across a rough wooden floor. It sounded like fingers' nails clawing at a surface they couldn't penetrate. Eliza sat up, her skin erupting in cold sweat, despite the 90-degree heat. She pressed her ear to the wall. The sound was rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat, but distorted. Between the thumps, there was a low melodic vibration. It took her a moment to realize what it was. It was someone humming. It was Delphine's voice. The madame was up there, in the dark, in the heat, while the rest of the world slept. And beneath the humming, Eliza heard the faintest, most pathetic sound she had ever known, a chorus of low, rattling breaths, like air moving through dry pipes. There were no birds in the attic. There were no animals. Eliza looked at the blue ribbon sitting on her knitstand. The brown stains seemed darker in the moonlight. She realized then that the clumsy servants weren't sent to the country. They were still here. They were just being perfected. The heat in New Orleans did not just rise. It solidified. By the second week of Eliza's tenure, the atmosphere inside the Delphine estate had become a physical weight, a humid pressure that seemed to squeeze the breath from one's lungs. Outside, the swamp was reclaiming the city, the air thick with dragonflies, and the distant, low roll of thunder that never brought rain. Inside, the gilded mask began to chip.